At 82 years, Otis Williams of The Temptations has finally broken his silence on the inside story of Motown Records, deep secrets, and some information that was left unsaid. Otis Williams and Berry Gordy of Motown. In the world of Motown, few journeys stand out as clearly as that of Otis Williams and The Temptations. Otis, the last surviving member of the original lineup, carries not just the memory of soulful harmonies and timeless hits, but also their time in Motown. The structure at Motown was unlike anything most young artists expected. Many came in with talent and energy, but Berry Gordy, the founder, believed that talent alone was not enough. He wanted his artists to be more than just singers. At 82 years old, Otis Williams looks back on a journey that began in Detroit when he was just a teenager chasing music dreams. Long before his name became linked to Motown, he was simply a young man with a deep love for rhythm and harmony, singing with local groups and trying to find his place in the music world. His first real attempt came with a group called Otis Williams and the Distance, who managed to create a regional wave. Their record was played in and around Detroit, and the small success brought them opportunities to perform at events known as record hops. These were community gatherings where new artists met radio DJs and tried to build relationships so that their songs would stay on the airwaves. It was during one of these record hops at St. Stephen's Community Center that Otis's life changed forever. That night, his group was performing when Berry Gordy, the founder of a brand new record company, walked in with The Miracles. At the time, The Miracles were already enjoying huge success with their song Shop Around, which was being played constantly on the radio. To Otis, seeing them walk into the room while his own group was still on stage felt like a clear picture of what the future might hold. Later that night, Otis was in the men's room when Berry Gordy approached him. Instead of passing by, Gordy stopped and told him directly that he liked the record his group had made. Those words stayed with Otis not just as a compliment, but as an invitation. Gordy encouraged him to come see him, and that single exchange would prove to be the spark that set an entirely new path in motion. Today, Otis Williams stands as the last living member of the original Temptations, carrying the weight of a story that stretches across 6 decades of triumphs, losses, and unforgettable music. His voice, steady yet reflective, carries not only songs but also the memories of what it took to build one of Motown's greatest legacies. 3 weeks later, Otis decided to act on Gordy's words. When he called the Motown office, he was connected to Mickey Stevenson, the head of artists and repertoire. Stevenson gave him one important warning before arranging the meeting. He told him never to be late when meeting with Berry Gordy, because nothing upset the Motown founder more than someone wasting his time. Soon after, they signed their very first Motown contract. Back then, Motown was still in its early stages. Detroit was widely known for the automobile industry, with the big three, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, dominating the city's economy. But quietly, Berry Gordy was building what would later be called Hitsville. Just as the auto companies were perfecting assembly lines for cars, Gordy was creating a similar system for music, developing raw singers into polished entertainers. For Otis Williams, that first contract marked the beginning of a transformation he could not have imagined. The road to success was not immediate. The group had to work hard, train constantly, and sometimes wait patiently while other acts at Motown got their turn in the spotlight. But all of that began to change in January of 1964, when Smokey Robinson presented them with a song he had written called "The Way You Do the Things You Do." At first, the group was unsure about it. The lyrics seemed playful and lighthearted, and they worried it might not make a strong impression. Still, they recorded it, and to their surprise, the song quickly gained attention. It climbed the charts and gave the group their very first national hit. At that point, the group was no longer just Otis Williams and the Distance. They had evolved into the Temptations, with a lineup that included Otis, David Ruffin, Melvin Franklin, Paul Williams, and Eddie Kendricks. Together, their voices blended into something unique, and with Motown's backing, they were on their way. The success of "The Way You Do the Things You Do" was proof that their hard work and training were paying off, but even greater success was just around the corner. Otis Williams revealed that Berry Gordy's vision for Motown was not simply to build a record label, but to build a movement. He gathered talent, songwriters, producers, and singers, and placed them all inside Hitsville, a modest house on West Grand Boulevard that became the heart of a global sound. From those rooms came melodies that would carry the name Motown across oceans and generations. Williams remembers that entering Hitsville meant stepping into a family. They worked day and night, chasing perfection, often recording multiple versions until Gordy felt the record was strong enough to reach the public. The competition was fierce, but it forced everyone to deliver their best. To Williams, it was more than a workplace. It was a school teaching discipline, stage presence, and above all, the importance of lasting music. The Temptations found their rhythm inside this system. With Gordy's guidance and the creative push of producers like Robinson and Whitfield, they moved from being one of many male groups in Detroit to becoming the flagship act of Motown's male roster. Each single tested their ability to connect with the audience, and each release built momentum. Motown's machine worked because every part supported the other. Songwriters feeding singers, producers refining tracks, choreographers shaping stagecraft, and a relentless touring schedule putting the music in front of audiences everywhere. Williams often reflects on how Motown was designed for success, but also for survival. Gordy understood that black artists needed more than raw talent. They needed polish, visibility, and a sense of professionalism that could win over audiences who might otherwise dismiss them. The Motown Finishing School trained singers on how to dress, speak, and present themselves in a world that often resisted their presence. For the Temptations, this guidance was critical. It gave them the confidence to step onto stages where few groups like them had performed before, and this was done with the help of a department in Motown Artist Personal Development Department. Otis often reflected on the way Motown operated in those early years. Unlike many record labels that quickly dropped groups when hits did not come right away, Motown believed in giving artists time to grow. For the Temptations, that patience was essential. Berry Gordy and his team knew they had something valuable in Otis's group, and instead of letting them fade, they invested in them. To make that possible, Motown created the Artist Personal Development Department in 1964. This department became the school where Otis Williams and his groupmates had to learn the strict routines that would prepare them for stardom. Otis recalled that Motown saw the talent in them, but wanted to, in his own words, spit-shine them so they would shine even brighter. Maxine Powell, who guided much of the training, taught them how to walk, talk, think, and act with grace. She pushed the young men to understand that they represented more than themselves. When they stepped out on stage or into an interview, they had to embody dignity and class. Powell reminded them that one of the first things people notice is the mouth. So teeth had to be spotless, smiles had to shine, and health had to be protected. She told them to take care of themselves because youth would not last forever. Otis admits that those words still guide him, even today, whenever he visits the dentist. Motown also instilled in them the importance of looking classy at all times. Ms. Evans, another mentor, would remind them constantly to be aware of their appearance. Clothes, grooming, and posture were not minor details, but essential parts of their identity as stars. For Otis and his group, it became second nature. When they walked into a room, they had to look like professionals, not just performers. The training was not only about looks. Maurice King worked with them on vocal phrasing and delivery. He drilled them in on how to shape words, control their tones, and make their singing good and emotional. They could not just sing with raw power. They had to deliver songs in a way that reached hearts and stayed in minds. Charlie Atkins, on the other hand, transformed their movements. Street dancing and casual steps were not enough for the Motown stage. He built their choreography with strict attention to timing and detail. Now, every appearance was a demonstration of perfection. Smokey Robinson, Norman Whitfield, Barrett Strong, and Eddie Holland added another layer. They supplied the songs, coached the delivery, and guided the Temptations inside the studio. The Funk Brothers, led by James Jamerson, gave the group the powerful backdrop they needed. With their playing, the songs gained life and energy. But again, nothing was left to chance. Every detail, from the arrangement of horns and strings to the harmony of voices, was carefully checked through Motown's quality control. Gordy had borrowed this idea from his days working on the Lincoln Mercury assembly line. Just as cars had to pass inspection before leaving the plant, so did every song. Tracks were reviewed, criticized, and approved only when they met the highest standards. The Temptations went through this process again and again. It was intense, and at times it seemed endless, but it paid off. In 1964, The Way You Do the Things You Do reached number 11 on the Billboard Hot 100. A year later, My Girl climbed to number 1. From there, the group went on to record 4 number 1 hits, 15 top 10 singles, and a career total of 53 charting records. Those numbers were the visible result of the strict routines that shaped them behind the scenes. They won Grammys, sold more albums, and continued to adapt while staying rooted in the training that had shaped them. Looking back, Otis often described Motown as more than just a record company. To him, it was like a family and a school combined. Artists clapped for each other, offered background voices, and even hung around Hitsville just to be part of the energy. There was competition, but it was healthy competition. Everyone wanted to shine, but they pushed each other forward. Motown built songs that people could hum, remember, and carry with them through life. To date, they have released 44 studio albums, recorded 37 Billboard Top 40 hits, won awards, earned television specials, and stood proudly in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. In total, 24 singers have worn the name Temptations, but only Otis has been there from the very beginning, standing as both leader and guardian of the legacy. With every lesson, they were transformed from a local group into polished stars capable of commanding any stage. That process was not always easy. Long hours of rehearsals tested their discipline, and the pressure to live up to Motown's high standards was intense. But Otis and his bandmates embraced it because they understood that success required more than talent. It demanded dedication, patience, and the willingness to keep learning. Every polished step they performed, every tailored suit they wore, and every note they sang on stage carried the fingerprint of the Motown system. In time, Otis realized that his journey with Motown was not just about making records. It was about becoming part of something larger, a cultural movement that gave African American artists a platform during a selective era. The lessons he and the Temptations learned in those early years prepared them not only for fame, but also for the challenges that came with breaking barriers in a divided world. And as the Temptations rose higher on the charts, they soon discovered that success on stage was only one part of their story. When Williams looks back, he sees Motown not just as a label, but as a shield that protected and nurtured them off stage. Motown shielded the Temptations off stage. As the Temptations enjoyed success on stage, their lives off stage told a different story. The group was climbing the charts, selling records, and performing for cheering crowds. But when they left the spotlight, the harsh truth of segregation followed them everywhere they went. Traveling through the United States during the 1960s meant facing constant reminders that fame did not protect African American artists at that time. The Temptations often found themselves on long bus rides as they moved from city to city. Unlike other performers who could easily book comfortable hotels, the Temptations had to deal with the reality that many places refused to let them stay because of the trends in that era. At times, they were forced to sleep on their tour bus, parked wherever they could find a safe spot. Some nights, the bus doubled as their only shelter. They would wash up in gas station restrooms and change clothes in cramped spaces before heading to the next show. Food was another daily struggle. Many restaurants would not serve them, and even if they were performing in packed venues nearby, the rules still applied once the curtain closed. In some towns, they had to depend on kind fans who quietly brought them meals or directed them to small diners where they would be welcome. Even their performances carried the weight of these divides. In certain venues, audiences were separated. The Temptations would look out into the crowd and see the division with their own eyes. They delivered the same powerful performances regardless. But deep inside, they longed for the day when their music could be enjoyed without barriers. Despite these challenges, Otis and his bandmates pressed forward. They believed in the power of their music, and in many ways, the challenges they faced only fueled their determination to succeed. They wanted to show the world that talent and dedication could rise above hatred and ignorance. Every night on stage, they carried not just their own dreams, but also the pride of countless fans who saw them as symbols of resilience. Berry Gordy and the Motown team understood these challenges too. They knew that sending their artists on the road meant exposing them to all of these, but they also believed that music had the power to break barriers. Gordy encouraged his artists to remain professional no matter what they faced. The training in artist development became especially important here. Maxine Powell's lessons about grace and poise, Charlie Atkins' choreographed moves, and Maurice King's musical coaching gave the Temptations the tools to carry themselves with dignity even in the harshest environments. That professionalism often became their shield. When most audiences saw the Temptations perform with flawless precision and style, it challenged the norm and created respect that might not have existed otherwise. For Otis, that was one of Motown's greatest contributions, not just making hits, but giving African-American artists the platform and polish to demand recognition on equal terms. It was in this environment of rising fame and relentless challenges that the group began to experience another kind of struggle, one that came not from society, but from within the group itself. Success brought recognition, but it also brought personal battles and conflicts that tested the very bond that held them together. Internal struggles. Otis Williams often remembered that the hardest battles were not always with the outside world, but sometimes with the men standing right beside him on stage. The early lineup, Otis Williams, Paul Williams, Eddie Kendricks, Melvin Franklin, and David Ruffin, had created a sound and image that defined Motown. Each man carried something unique. Eddie Kendricks had the high, silky falsetto. David Ruffin brought raw power with his lead vocals. Paul Williams added a smooth, soulful tone and was known as the backbone of their harmonies. Melvin Franklin's deep bass anchored their songs with a strength that seemed unshakable. And Otis himself, though not the standout voice, was the glue who kept everyone focused and moving forward. Together, they made magic. But success came at a cost. By the mid-1960s, David Ruffin had emerged as one of the most recognizable voices of the group. His performance on My Girl had made him a star in his own right, and audiences began to focus on him as much as they did on the group as a whole. That spotlight brought problems. Ruffin started showing up late for rehearsals, sometimes missing them entirely. He grew frustrated with the idea of being part of a group when he wanted to be seen as a star on his own. There were moments when he refused to travel with the others, arriving separately in limousines instead of riding the bus. He even suggested that the group's name be changed to David Ruffin and the Temptations, an idea that caused deep tension. The breaking point came when Ruffin's behavior became impossible to ignore. Berry Gordy and the Motown team valued the group's reputation too much to let it collapse under one man's actions. In 1968, David Ruffin was replaced by Dennis Edwards. The change was painful, but it was necessary if the group was to survive. The Temptations did survive, but the transition was not smooth. At the same time, Motown was moving into a new era. The music was changing, the themes were becoming deeper, and the Temptations had to adapt if they wanted to remain relevant. Their new sound leaned into social issues, reflecting the troubles of America in the late 1960s. Songs like Cloud 9 marked the beginning of what became known as their psychedelic soul phase. With Dennis Edwards now taking the lead, the shift kept them on the charts, but the personal battles did not end. Paul Williams, one of the founding members, faced his own struggles behind the scenes. Though he was admired as the backbone of the group, he battled health issues and personal demons and eventually left the group. For Motown and Otis, who had leaned on Paul as one of the most reliable members, it was painful to see Paul go. Motown tried to help, but the pace of the music business left little room for rest or recovery. Eddie Kendricks also began to feel restless. His falsetto had carried many of their biggest hits, but by the early 1970s, he was growing unhappy with the direction of the group. Kendricks clashed with Otis and others, and eventually he decided to leave the group to pursue a solo career. His departure in 1971 was another blow to the Temptations' foundation and their relationship with Motown. By then, Otis was used to change. He had already seen members come and go, and he had accepted that the Temptations were bigger than any one person. Still, each departure left scars. Holding the group together became less about just singing and more about managing personalities, egos, and personal struggles. Otis often said that being in the Temptations was like being in a marriage with multiple people at once. It required patience, compromise, and forgiveness, but also came with moments of deep hurt. Even with all these challenges, they won awards, performed around the world, and remained one of Motown's most important acts. Songs like Ball of Confusion and Papa Was a Rolling Stone showed how powerful they could be when united, even as internal battles continued. Paul Williams' health worsened, and he passed on in 1973. Through it all, Otis carried the weight of leadership. Even during the toughest years, Otis never forgot the lessons Motown had taught him. Those values became the foundation that allowed him to guide the group. By the time the 1970s were in full swing, the Temptations had already left an unshakable mark on music and had already proven themselves as one of the crown jewels of Motown. Soon, Motown itself began to change, and so did the landscape around the Temptations. The label that once operated from the modest house known as Hitsville in Detroit started to expand, chasing larger markets and broader audiences. Not just that, the family feeling, which was like the foundation of Motown, had shifted. Motown was becoming a major business, and with growth came new pressures. As the years passed, Motown itself went through transformations. The label moved from Detroit to Los Angeles, and the intimate setting that had once shaped young artists gave way to a new corporate identity. For Otis, the move symbolized both progress and loss. Progress because Motown had grown into a global powerhouse. Loss because the family atmosphere of Hitsville was gone. Still, he knew that the foundation laid in Detroit could never be erased. The lessons, the training, and the sense of unity remained with him long after the small studio doors had closed. By the 1990s, the Temptations were celebrated as legends, yet they continued to perform and record. New members brought fresh energy, keeping the group alive for audiences who had grown up with them and for younger fans discovering them for the first time. For Otis, telling the story of their journey with honesty and clarity. What stood out most in Otis's reflections was his deep gratitude for the opportunities Motown had given him. He knew that without Berry Gordy's vision, without Smokey Robinson's songs, and without the training of mentors like Maxine Powell, Charlie Atkins, and Maurice King, the Temptations might never have reached their full potential. He spoke often of how Motown believed in artists, giving them time to grow when other labels would have walked away. That patience, he said, was the reason the Temptations became more than just another group. It was the reason they became timeless. In the end, the routines and activities at Motown were not just about producing hits. They were about shaping lives, teaching responsibility, and building stars who could stand the test of time. For the Temptations, those long hours from morning to evening, the constant focus on grooming, the endless rehearsals, and the strict rules became the secret behind a legacy that has lasted for decades and continues to inspire generations.